Hey guys, what's up? What's going on? Welcome to my corner of the internet. Today we're going to be talking about aphantasia. So if you're curious on what aphantasia is or kind of the background on it, just keep watching. Alright, before we get started, don't forget to tap that subscribe button and that notification bell and that like button. Yeah, and that's it. Okay, let's get started. Alright guys, sorry, I'm really having technical difficulties. I don't know what the issue is today, but that's why I have eyeshadow on. Okay, so let's get started with this video. Okay, so I want you guys to close your eyes, keep them closed. I want you to picture in your mind's eye a purple rose. Do you see it? Can you visualize it? Let me know in the comments down below. Anyways, if you can picture it in your mind what a purple rose would look like, you don't have aphantasia. If you can't, well, you have aphantasia. Just letting you know. I mean, most people don't even know that they have aphantasia. Anyways, what is aphantasia, you're gonna ask? Well, when I looked it up on the interweb, they told me. I didn't get it on Wikipedia or anything like that. It is defined as a noun, and it is the inability to be able to visualize mental images, that is not being able to picture something in one's mind. Many people with aphantasia are also unable to recall sounds, smells, or sensations of touch. So to sum it all up, it's the inability to form mental images that are not present. So aphantasia apparently wasn't even studied or anything. It didn't even have a name back in the day. I think the name came about in 2015 when the professor or the doctor, whoever, I don't know, when I was researching it, some said he was just a professor, but some said he was a neurologist. But like, to me, I think he was a neurologist because he's one smart cookie, like, to come up with all of this stuff. Anyways, his name was Dr. I.Am.JenneKim. Him and a colleague actually came up with the name aphantasia from a term that Aristotle used for the mind's eye. What? Like, you gotta tell me that's not one smart cookie to come up with names like that and using Aristotle. Anyways, it is a Greek term. Let's move forward, okay? He came up with this name in 2015. I believe the reason why he started to research on aphantasia is because he was referred a patient who underwent open heart surgery, and shortly after, the patient, known as MX, he was like, doctor, like, I can't, like, visualize anything anymore. Like, if you told me to picture grass and pine trees, I can't see it, but I know that pine trees are darker than the grass. And I can tell you this because I know what color grass is and what color pine trees are, and I remember the different shades. And I know the different shades, but I can't picture it. So that intrigued Dr. Zeman. As, I mean, wouldn't it intrigue anybody else, like, if someone said that to you? So Dr. Zeman starts to look into this a little bit more. He's like reading, like, he's looking into papers and literature. Like, has anyone ever studied this? Like, is this new? Like, what happened? Like, how did this happen? And as he's searching, he doesn't really find much, and he's just like, what the heck? Like, is this guy making shit up? Until he comes across a paper that was written back in the 1800s. So this paper was written by a Francis Galton. We'll put his name here. Listen, I can't pronounce names. I can't pronounce a lot of things, okay? Like, this is just me. So he finds this paper by Francis Galton, and it was called Breakfast. And Francis Galton ended up studying about 100 men. He had these 100 men come to him, and he had these men, like, sit down and talk about their breakfast, like the breakfast table in which they sat at every single morning, and ate breakfast. Like, he wanted to know, like, the colors, the sharpness of images, like, what they remembered, like the china, the walls, the wallpaper, like, you know, forks are part of China. But, you know, yeah. And to his astonishment, like, 12 of those men could barely recall anything. And they sat at this table every single day eating breakfast. Hold on, I'll be back. I'm gonna do my eyeliner. Okay, I'm back. Anyways, up till then, they kind of assumed that the phrase mental imagery was just kind of a literal term, but not anymore. But since that was the only paper that Dr. Zeman could find, he was like, no, I'm gonna keep looking into this. And the more he looked into it, the more questions he got than answers. So he's like, what the heck? Like, what's going on here? Like, so he ends up publishing a paper that was featured in Discover magazine. Like, what? Like, go you, man. Like, Discover magazine, big deal, right? Even to this day. So after this paper gets published, I believe in 2010, people reach out to him and they're like, hey, I think it's like 20 or 21 people end up contacting him, and they're like, hey, I have this thing that you're talking about. However, I've dealt with it my whole life. It wasn't just something that happened. So then Dr. Zeman was like, oh, okay, so it's not just like this guy, and it's not just like it could be formed at, like, it could be inherited. Like, let's look into this a little bit more. So as Dr. Zeman's looking into this, he realizes that everybody who has a form of aphantasia is very, very different. Like, from the way that they visualize to what they can visualize, it's all very different. And so he's like, oh, that's cool. So I want to know, like, what could cause it. And he concluded that it can happen after a form of brain injury, or after long periods of depression or some sort of psychosis. I thought that was kind of cool. Psychosis, huh? Like, well, so that kind of made me curious, because I've had postpartum depression for a couple months now. Well, not a couple months, for a few years now. So I was like, But a question that I was kind of curious on, and I'm sure everybody else is kind of curious, is like, do they dream? How do they dream? Do they dream in images? Yes? No? Like, do you just dream in blank space, in like darkness? Well, when he looked into that, he learned that some people dream and some don't. And by dreaming, he meant, like, do they see imagery? Wild, right? It's like they saw imagery. Like, some would dream in imagery, even if they couldn't imagine things, like when they're awake, like during the day. So it's like if they're up and they were like trying to visualize things, they couldn't. But when they were sleeping, they could see everything that they were dreaming about. I thought that was so wild and so cool. Like, man, isn't the brain so fascinating? Like, how that is? How? Like, but is that fair? Like, how would you feel? Would you feel like, well, what the hell, brain? Like, how come I can dream but I can't see things when I'm awake? Dr. Zeman kind of believes that those with lifelong aphantasia, it's somewhat hereditary, and that someone near, like someone as a close relative can have aphantasia, like your brother, your sister, your mom. And if you're Asian, you know, y'all don't talk about things like this. Just kidding. Moving on forward. So a lot of people, like, as the study was going on, were like, listen, this just seems crazy. Like, is Mr. MX, patient MX, I don't know if he was a man or a woman, like, Just, it was never disclosed. Anyways, was this patient lying? Like, are you making this up? Because like, it's such a rare trait. I don't want to call it a disorder, right? Like, it's just such a rare trait that like, it was hard to believe. Like, how is it that you could once visualize things and now you can't, and now 20 people have come forward after Dr. Zeman writes this paper and says, hey, but I've had it my whole life. Like, you lying, bro? No, he was not lying. Patient MX wasn't lying. Dr. Zeman ended up hooking up patient MX to a machine called a functional magnetic resonance imagery, also known as an fMRI. And as he was hooked up to this and he was being asked to picture things, certain parts of the brain that are supposed to light up when you are recalling past times or visualizing things, they were either, there was like little activity or no activity. So I was like, see, why does everyone always think just because you're a little different or someone hasn't heard of something, they lying? Why? Anyways, so to Dr. Zeman, he thinks that there are like subgroups of aphantasia with this trait or condition, whatever you want to call it. There's like different subgroups and there's like different like within the subgroups, it could be affected, it can affect you differently, basically. In later studies, after Dr. Zeman continues to study this phenomenon, I think it's a phenomenon, condition, traits, whatever you want to call it, he later finds that some individuals reported with struggling remembering events in life, but also that some struggled with face recognition, and that's called prosopagnosia. Anyways, if you're like me, you're wondering, well, with people who have aphantasia, are they creative? Can they be creative? How are they creative? Because I know the type of creative that I am. It's like I have to visualize it in my head, or I see it and I get inspiration, and then from there I can create, right? So when I was asked this question, I was like, well, I mean, anybody can be anything, right? But like, I want to know how. As Dr. Zeman is getting more patients and, you know, he's studying all of these people, one of his patients, his name is Mr. Schlattner. If I'm butchering these names, I'm really sorry. He is an entrepreneur. He owns his own company for web designs. Like, he develops websites, right? So you're thinking, okay, well, to develop websites, you have to be one creative person, right? Because you have to be able to visualize what you see for your client and what the client wants from you. And if you can't see it, then how do you do it, right? Well, what Schlattner says is that people kind of like look at him kind of crazy because he has this process on how he develops his websites. And again, I thought this was intriguing. So he has this big whiteboard, he has paper, pencil, stuff like that, so he can start to design his webpage like that, and it just kind of comes together in the end. But he needs this whiteboard, paper, pen, like the process that he does it in, like the process in which he like designs the web page, he has to do it in this way or he can't. And when I was reading that, that reminded me of the book called David and Goliath. A book about the underdogs is what it's really about, and it's in the title too. But Malcolm Gladwell actually ended up writing this book, and it really reminded me about that. So people who have a disability, a condition, something that makes them a little different, I think have an advantage, because, especially after reading that book. Anyways, we're not going to go into that. but basically, when you have a disadvantage and you want to be successful in something, you have to find a different route on how it's going to make you successful. And that's exactly what Schlattner did. He was like, okay, well, I can't visualize things. However, I'm going to take the steps to be one hella good web designer. And if it means that I have to do it in XYZ, and it kind of takes me around in circles, or it doesn't make sense to my partners or to my clients, that's okay, because at the end of the day, I can do it, and the outcome is different, right? I mean, the outcome is there, and that's all that matters. So I thought that was really cool. I liked that because instead of saying, oh, I can't visualize things and I have aphantasia, like I can't be a web designer, so instead of chasing my dreams, I'm gonna go do this instead. No, Schlattner said, no, this is what I want to do, okay? Success. As Dr. Siemens wrapping up his study with patient MX, he was curious to know if after some time was he able to visualize things? Was he able to recall all of these things? And to Dr. Siemens' astonishment, and to mine, he was able to remember certain things, but not all. And Dr. Siemens just kind of concluded that the neurons that were damaged from the surgery were either rebuilt or they started to reconnect somehow. So I'm like, that's cool. It's just so fascinating to me that what the brain is possible, what the brain is capable of doing. Anyways, Dr. Zeman was asked multiple times, is aphantasia a disability? And I really truly like how he put it, because it was just in such a beautiful way. And he said, in quotes, "It's an intriguing variation in human experience, but not a disorder."